Hello and welcome to the School Safety Free Period. I'm Amanda Klinger.
And I'm Dr. Amy Klinger.
You say your name every time. It's just kind of the way we do things here.
Or when you started out, you were like, hello. And I looked at you like, what's wrong?
I was doing my NPR podcasting voice. We're the founders and the directors of the Educators School Safety Network. We're a national nonprofit, and we provide educator-focused school safety professional development resources and technical assistance to K-12 schools throughout the United States and Canada. You can find our organization and more information about the work that we do at our website, www.eschoolsafety.org. In our daily work as trainers and researchers, we typically take a fairly studious approach to the critical work of school safety and violence prevention. However, in this, our school safety free period, we're a little less formal, we're a little less academic, we forget to say our names, we don't know what we're doing, even though we do a podcast every week, and we have a little bit more fun. And so we examine school safety issues and current events in a little bit more of an informal, conversational fashion.
You forgot to mention the high production value and professionalism.
Yes.
As exhibited so far
Yes.
in this episode.
Exactly.
It's a Mr. Do, Mr. Don't episode.
So today we wanted to talk a little bit about a concern that you maybe didn't know you needed to be concerned about already, which is AI chatbots embedded in social media, potentially spreading misinformation about an incident that happened or could happen at your school and having to deal with the fallout from that. So do you want to tell us the tale?
Yeah, well, it's going to be tough because I don't really understand some of what I'm saying. So you'll have to jump in here. Because when you said at the beginning something you should be concerned about that you didn't know what you should be concerned about, I thought, and that you might not even understand, which would be me. So, but this is an incident that happened in South Carolina. There was a high school there that had a bomb threat. And apparently some folks went to Facebook. Am I allowed to say?
Yeah.
Went to a social media platform that begins with an F. Now, they went to a social media platform to get information about what was happening and ask a question, which a chatbot, if I'm saying that right, an AI chatbot answered, but answered...
Let me interject there. So what happened was Facebook rolled out a generative AI chatbot into the search bar of Facebook without really making it very clear that that's what was happening. So people thought they were just searching like a Boolean search on Facebook, like I would want to look for this information and I would type it into the search bar, and people did not, because Facebook did not make it really clear that it was a generative AI chatbot that would return results, as opposed to what we would think of like a search query and results of like, here's what's on Facebook for that. So instead of just
chatbot came back with,
yes,
oh, there's been a shooting at this particular school, and there's been multiple injuries, and someone is in custody, and it's in lockdown. The students have been evacuated. All of the like standard language that is typically accompanies the tragedies that sometimes occur with gun violence in school.
Yeah, so pause and let me explain why that happens. So a generative AI typically uses a large language model, which is you ask a query and it predicts based on the whole history of the internet, or, its training data, what it's been trained upon, what typically would be a response to a query like this. So instead of saying, Mom, what do you have in your pantry right now? And then you go look, this would be like a normal search. You go look in your pantry and go, I have this, 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 and this. Instead, it would be like, what do you have in your pantry? And then you go, well, typically people have rice and lentils, and you didn't look, you just predicted based on training data of what's typically in a pantry. So they asked for information about, in this instance, they asked for information about what happened at that school that day. And instead of Facebook returning, here's what people actually posted, it returned, here's things that people typically find when they ask about a shooting incident.
So, in other words, it would be like if you ask me, what are the elements of a spy movie, and I haven't seen this movie, I just say, well, probably there's a car chase and he jumps off of stuff and the villain gets killed at the end. So that's what you're saying.
Right. So it is a predictive model of like, what's an answer that makes sense here, as opposed to tell me what people actually posted on Facebook. It's predict what makes sense to the answer here.
All of which is super fascinating. Unfortunately, the people reading the post that said there were injuries at their kid's school and that there was a shooting did not have the same clinical of, oh, this must be a predictive AI instead of whatever.
And in defense of those people,
got hairy.
And in defense of those people, and I don't know if Facebook has fixed this since, but in defense of those people, it was not clear. Facebook did not do a good job of communicating. Your responses are created, the responses you see are created by a generative AI. That was not clear to folks.
So I want to read a quote from a cybersecurity professor. I didn't know those people existed, but he said, it's a perfect example of why people can't take everything AI says as fact. Duh. Oh, yes. So I guess, I am not a professor of that at all. And I don't even, as I have already demonstrated, I can't hardly even talk about this intelligently. But I think I could say that typically what you find on social media is not 100% true all the time. So that might be the takeaway. But I think the more realistic conversation that I want to have about this is not so much about AI and social media, but is about the idea of communication. So, and I don't know in this particular case at all. So let's just talk more hypothetically. When a school does not communicate, it doesn't mean that people just stop wondering. It means that they go to alternative sources to find information.
Mm-hmm.
Now, understandably, parents have a very short fuse or a very short amount of patience for what on earth is happening in this building where my kid is.
Mm-hmm.
So I understand that. But also, schools tend to not communicate as quickly or comprehensively as they might because they're either scrambling to respond because they haven't planned or talked about it, or they're really behind the eight ball, or they're not sure what to do, or a whole variety of things that compromise, and it becomes the first domino to fall is we're not sure what to say, so we're not going to say anything.
Mm-hmm.
And then somebody else, well, the parent goes, somebody better tell me, and then they're going to start exploring other avenues for information, none of which are going to yield good information.
Well, and I think it probably speaks to the notion that here the misinformation came from a generative AI chatbot. A actual human person is just as capable of coming up with misinformation about a situation like this.
Misinformation.
Right. Right. And so here the specific wrinkle was a generative AI chatbot, but this is not a problem that is unique to AI. I mean, anyone is capable of coming up with misinformation. And I think that underscores the point that you made, that just because we don't have the capacity or the bandwidth to communicate right now, or just because we don't have new information to communicate right now, doesn't mean that people are not interested in information right now. And so if that you have to provide information, or people will get it from whatever source, whether it's their unreliable narrator or their unreliable neighbor or their unreliable generative AI chatbot.
Well, and I am astonished sometimes by the number of school leaders who will say, well, I don't think anyone would know. They'll know. I
don't think anyone would know what.
Like they'll say, well, probably nobody even knows that we had whatever. They 100% know.
Oh, yeah.
You have to assume they know. And you'd have to assume that they know like right now, right in this moment. And I think that's the only criticism that I will level. I mean, I think schools, it's tough to decide when to what, and you're responding, you're doing all these things. The only criticism I will level is do not delude yourself into believing nobody will know.
Yeah.
Because they absolutely will. So get that out of the way.
We had a discussion at a school not that long ago about the notion of if you had, the fire alarm went off, for smoke in the kitchen, but it turns out everything was okay and we didn't even have to evacuate the kids, blah, blah, blah. Would you send a note home? And we had some discussion about if you send a note home, right, or you communicate for every little thing, every time there's a Bigfoot, every time that's a throwback to a previous podcast for our regular listeners here. Every time there's a little bit of smoke, if you send a message for every single thing, that now you will dilute the messaging and people will pay less attention to it. And so some of the discussion...
Dilute or dilute?
Dilute. You will dilute the messaging.
Diluting it means very...
It will be so delusional about the messaging. But you will, that you will...
User fatigue.
That you will have user fatigue. And so there was a discussion about what are the different types of communication channels that we have and what is the hierarchy of those so that we only send the most critical communications to parents on the highest value communication channels. But every time there's something that we feel like is little and piddly and whatever, we still post about it on our Facebook page, or we still have that there for people who want to find the information, there is that snippet of information somewhere, and maybe it's not a push, maybe it's a, instead of a broadcast, it's something that people have to seek out, because that would be a lower, value communication channel, that people have to do stuff. But I think that's a really, really critical consideration ahead of time, that we have something that's lower level. It's not as important. I do still want to speak on it. And what are the communication channels that we use for that?
It is possible to over-communicate. We all know people that over-communicate. I mean...
Present company excluded, the two of us.
It is possible to over-communicate. And, if Betty threw up in the hallway, I do we really need to, communicate that,
It'll be on TikTok. You don't need to... It'll be on TikTok. Don't worry about it.
Yeah. So, I think there's that. But I think the tendency tends to be not over communicating, but under communicating, or maybe a better way to say it would be reactive communicating.
Yeah.
So I didn't say anything until I got 17 phone calls and I saw somebody posted on Facebook what happened. And now I'm going to share.
Mm-hmm.
So I make it look like I am reluctantly looping the parents in as to what happened. So, there's a lot of nuance to it, but I think for me, the overarching takeaway is that you've got to talk about this before. You can't be in the middle of an event and go, so what do you think we should tell the parents? What do you think we should push out? Do you want to write something? Let me know what you're going to put. I think the overarching thing is we have to have talked about it in advance. We have to establish when everyone is calm and no one's cranked up, what we're going to communicate, what we're not going to communicate, where you can expect to hear from us. Where you should go to get good information. All of those kind of conversations, if you have them beforehand, especially at the beginning of the school year, I think you're going to avoid, you're never going to stop all these kind of problems, but you maybe can short circuit some of them.
Yeah. It speaks to the notion of what we always talk about, of looking at a situation, what could be the problem, and how can I set myself up for success to respond to that sort of problem. I feel like if every K-12 school in America took that advice to its logical conclusion, I feel like we'd put ourselves out of business. If every school administrator all the time, every day, just looked at what could be the problem and let me do things to set myself up for success, I feel like that would solve it.
Well, yeah, except we have also seen it where people
True.
Okay, well, what could happen here at the assembly? The roof could collapse. There's no reason to believe the roof is going to collapse. There could be an armed, battalion of intruders burst in. Okay, probably not. So, yeah, what could go wrong here when we have already had discussions about our potential risks and vulnerabilities?
Yeah.
And that makes a difference, too, is having already looked at some of those things, more, and what are the things you have in place that can help to short circuit this? And in this particular case, it was a bomb threat. We oftentimes see that bomb threats get real chaotic because there's not been a discussion about what to do. And there's not been, any kind of communication of how we respond to bomb threats. So whenever it's that uncertainty, it really ratchets up the demand for communication when there's uncertainty about what's going on.
Do you have anything else? Or are you
I feel like I did pretty good talking about something that I don't know or understand.
I would agree. I think
Which leads you to believe that that must be a lot of things that I talk about that I
I
don't know.
I think we did a good job of dividing and conquering, but also I think the reality is that this is not just an AI problem. So I think there's plenty to unpack there, whether you have the AI wrinkle or not. So,
Well, I think maybe the overarching thing is, social media may not be all it's cracked up to be.
wow. Hey, there's a hot take. Well, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the School Safety Free Period. Please connect with us via social media, ironically enough. We have links in the show notes. We'd love to hear from you. Also, be sure to check out the free resources and other information that we have on our website, www.eschoolsafety.org. So until next time.